hello, and thank you very much. I'm sorry I wasn't able to be here at the beginning, but the ferry took longer than anybody had told me. I hope I have some people here tonight who were with me 2 years ago when the Jimmy Walter Euro Tour came through. Daniel DeWitt was also a speaker at that time. And I told people, I reminded them that I actually come from a part of the Dutch Empire myself. The part of the Dutch Empire, of course, you guessed it's New York City, but not just New York City, but Flushing, Vlissingen. It's a part of Queens. Maybe you've heard of it. It's northern Queens, northern Long Island. And we had a Dutch settlement there in the 1630s and 1640s, and some of these traditions are still alive. We had a fight with Governor Peter Stuyvesant about freedom of religion, and the people from Flushing wanted to have religious tolerance, and Peter Stuyvesant didn't like the idea. Now I have to ask for your help tonight. I've got 1 hour because I'm told that the ferry leaves, and then we're all stranded. Am I right? Okay, so you've heard now, I believe, this presentation of London 7-7. I have to stress for you, that is now the past. You got to clear the decks for action. Everything has changed. Huge changes have occurred. US and British imperialism have totally reversed their fields, and everything that you thought you knew about this is now obsolete and probably inaccurate. So we have, after the neocons are gone, out of power. Bush, Cheney, gone. We'll show you. We have a new phase. Wait a minute, because that's the good news. The bad news is that you've gone out of the frying pan and into the fire. Because now you have something worse than a neocon that you're going to see tonight. And the neocons were going to bring you a war in the Persian Gulf. The danger is now literally World War III with hydrogen bombs and nuclear missiles. So we now also have a new phase of the US-British false flag operations. Just remember that the false flag operations are determined by the needs of the strategic situation. And now we really got to make some time. I'm the author of this book. I have a few copies to sell. I can autograph them for you. Please come up at the end. I am not completely obscure. I have been on many of the main cable television networks. Here's Hannity on Fox News. About a year ago, CNN, C-SPAN, and all the rest of it. This is now the thing that you must read. Obama, the Postmodern Coup. And we have that. And for only €5, you can get it on a disc. So please come and get these discs. This is now the book that I've written this year. And I've just finished a second book on Obama. I am so concerned about Obama as a threat to the world that I've written not 1, but 2 books. And if you valued any of my work in the past, I urge you take seriously what I'm going to be telling you tonight. Works in the past include the unauthorized biography of George Bush the Elder. I will be publishing within about a month or less an unauthorized biography of Obama. And it's worse. It's worse than Bush. I represent an organized political force. It's a faction you may not have heard of. It's called the Pumas. See the Puma? This is a faction of the Democratic Party, which is anti-Obama, anti-elitist, anti-banker, and anti-Obama, and in favor of New Deal traditions, the traditional Democratic Party. This is a group that has come into existence in the past 6 or 8 weeks. It's called the Pumas. I urge you, look at some websites like puma08.com. Now, you know my theories on state-sponsored false flag terrorism. I think the terminology used in the film you've just seen is drawn from this to some extent. The patsies, the moles, and the professional killers or the technicians. The patsies, of course, the dupes, the useful idiots, those poor guys from Leeds who were made into cannon fodder that day in London. The moles, the private network infesting the government, and then the technicians, the professional killers who really can create these things. It's run from a privatized command center, and it depends on the brainwashed world of the controlled corporate media. government resources are used to help create terrorism, they are accessed through drills. Now we've got to look a little bit about the history of it. For quite a few centuries, the superpower of this kind of intelligence work was here, the Venetian Republic. The Venetian Republic. And I've written about that in another book, Against Oligarchy, where you can see, at least to some extent, the Venetian Lion and the Venetian Basilica. It then transferred itself to England. There's a continuity from the Venetians to the English. And here's Queen Elizabeth I, the flower portrait. I don't know if you can see it. She was so proud of her intelligence agencies that she had eyes and ears painted on her dress. Do you see it? Eyes and ears? And a huge snake on her arm. So this is the English intelligence services. The most famous false flag operation in recent history is Guy Fawkes. I hope you know the gunpowder plot. If you've ever been to England, November 5th, it's a holiday. It's the basis of the whole national ideology. And here's Guy Fawkes. He's supposedly about to blow up the Houses of Parliament. Now, the trick here was, this is a false flag. It's actually organized by government ministers. But they say that this guy is a Catholic. So they want to target Catholics. They want to target the Pope and Spain. So they make sure that he's a Catholic and his group are Catholics. The transition from London, from Venice to the British is what you see here. See the Venetian Canal? Here's a Venetian canal. And here's St. Paul's Church in London. The transition is the Venetian intelligence methods moved to England, and with them moved the false flag. So that whereas once we had Venice as a center, here's the Bank of England. We can think of the Bank of England as being the current center. Now they went through phases. It changes, and this is what I'm driving at here, not so much the details, but the fact that this changes. In the first half of the 19th century, the typical false flag terror operation would be somebody like Mazzini, working for the British. He's an ultra-nationalist. He had a stiletto on his desk. He'd stick you with a stiletto if you said something he didn't like. So this allows the British to organize a whole series of operations over decades and decades and decades, up until about 1848, the revolutions. Then they have to change, a phase change in terrorism. We now have Bakunin, the anarchist. He's not a nationalist, he's an anarchist. And then we get a whole series of assassinations carried out by anarchists. You can kill a Russian Tsar, try to kill Napoleon III of France, or try to kill an American president. Here's an anarchist. This is Czolgosz, mentally disturbed anarchist, recluse, and patsy. What did he do? He assassinated an American president, McKinley, shot twice in 1901. There he is. He's got his pistol. He's shooting the president. So decades and decades and decades of terrorism under anarchist cover. This is the case officer who controlled Czolgosz. Her name is Emma Goldman. She was operating for them in Poland and then moved to Chicago. Now, there was an attempt to kill Franklin D. Roosevelt in 1933, carried out by an anarchist still. Here's the mayor of Chicago, Mayor Chernak. The way this assassination attempt went, it was bungled. This man was killed and Roosevelt survived. But the intent, of course, was to kill Roosevelt under anarchist cover. Now something has changed. 1963. What's this? Is he an anarchist? No. Is he a nationalist? No. He's a lone assassin. So now a big change has occurred. A big change. Instead of nationalists and anarchists, now we have a lone assassin. Is he connected to Cuba? We don't know. Is he connected to Russia? We don't know that either. But he's Lee Harvey Oswald, and this is a whole period of terrorism in the 1960s. Now, later in the 60s, you know the names of the Red Brigades of Italy, the Baader-Meinhof Group, the Red Army faction of Germany. These are terrorists inside the United States. This is Bernardine Dorn and Bill Ayers. They're leaders of a group called the Weathermen. The Weathermen are terrorists inside the United States. It just so happens that these are the two closest friends of Obama today. This is the social circle of Obama in Chicago. These people, of course, are older. It's almost 40 years since these mugshots were taken. But Bernardine Dorn and Bill Ayers, and in particular, this guy here, they're both professors. They've both got tenured professorships, and he is a top foundation operative in the Chicago area who made Obama's career possible by giving him the most important job he ever got. Time goes on. We have the conflict between Kissinger and Aldo Moro of Italy about the role of the Communist Party in the Italian government. And at that point, the Red Brigades come in. These are, again, left-wing terrorists, like the Weathermen, like Baader Meinhof. We're now in an era of left-wing student terrorism who talk about Mao and communism and so forth, but are actually run by NATO intelligence. So here's Moro. And I wrote a book about this. You can see, the point of my book was to say, wait a minute, forget the Red Brigades. This is the British. This is NATO intelligence. NATO intelligence. The US and the British. Who killed Aldo Moro? Well, you can get an idea. Then the gears change, unfortunately, but the internet cafe situation in this town is not so great, so I couldn't find the Black September. But now we get into Arab terrorism, but not religious, not Islamic, political. A new phase again, another new phase. How about this? This is now the assassination of Sadat in 1981 by people who are Arabs, but not political. They're now religious. These are Muslim fundamentalists, so-called, but always working for Western intelligence, whether they know it or not. And now another change, completely different. American right-wing men who don't like the government, right? Oklahoma City, Timothy McVeigh. Sorry about the lack of a picture. Do you get the idea? Terrorism cannot be continued in the same mode without making changes. You cannot be Johnny One Note. You must modulate. You've got to reverse the field every now and then, or it gets to be impossible. Now, we're accustomed to living. For the past 7 years, we live in the world of this. 9/11, Bin Laden, War on Terror, Al-Qaeda, Bin Laden's Trail of Terror. And of course, we know the fraud of all this. We know of the story of the controlled demolition. We can see the molten metal coming out. You can see, again from close up, the molten metal coming out of the buildings, the thermate or thermite reactions being used to prepare the collapse of the buildings because they'd been prepared. And the main pillars in the buildings were cut. Look how neatly they were cut. They would cut on a sliding path so that the top of the building would slide off the pillars and start going down. And they were neatly diced into segments that could be put on trucks. We know the fraud of Building 7. Here's the charming lady from the BBC saying the 47-story Building 7, Salomon Brothers building, has collapsed. Now, wait a minute. That's it. She's not a New Yorker. She doesn't know what she's talking about. There's the building right there, and she's telling you it has collapsed. 23 minutes before the fact. That's really getting on top of the news. How about this one? The Pentagon. A Boeing went into that hole. These windows are intact, but the Boeing disappeared there. And there's even barriers here in front that are still standing up. And at Shanksville, another Boeing went into that hole. Why don't they bring it up? Well, there's a mine, so bring it up. No, can't do it. Okay? So this has now reached the point of absurdity. And above all, it's reached the point of diminishing returns. The contribution that I've made to this topic is this, what you see here, that it was all done under the drills. Here's Amalgam Virgo 01. Look, the face of bin Laden is built into the scenario of the drill, and it's June 2001. It's several months before September 11th. And here's a plane. You get the idea. It flies across international Canada airspace and eventually is going to hit the capital. Well, that's a version that they didn't do. And they didn't use a plane. They used a cruise missile or some drone. Now, if you want to know about this, I recommend 9/11, especially the Italian edition, because I've been very lucky. I've got a French edition, La Terreur Fabriquée. You can get that. You can get La Fabbrica del Terrore in Italian, or you can get Falso Terrorismo in Spanish, and read all about the 25 plus drills on 9/11 and how all of these drills were used to actually create the effects that you see. And of course, we have the patsies. Again, there's no proof involving these people. What were they? Where were they? We don't know. Atta, clearly a leading double agent, somebody who does exist, an Egyptian working for U.S. intelligence, not a Muslim in any interesting sense, lives with a prostitute, drinks liquor, cocaine addict, not Islamic at all, and the rest of these people, Hani Hanjour, and so forth. And above all, Atta, the demon. So for a while, this was the enemy image. The idea was the US, the British, and the Israelis at war with the Arab and Islamic world, alone forever. Well, it doesn't work. And now we have bin Laden. Here's a bin Laden from 2004. Here's a bin Laden from 2007. He's getting younger. Maybe with this you don't have too much luck with the ladies. My research has allowed me to reveal, I've always said, this is a troupe of actors, okay? This is a troupe of impersonators and actors and, actors. I've been able to discover who's actually playing the role of the new bin Laden. There it is. I'm revealing it here. Now, the demand is, of course, to investigate 9/11. And we were able to put this in the face of the Savior, the Messiah, the Redeemer, being brought up, of course, by the Wall Street banking interests. And he's, of course, Obama is more devoted to the 9/11 myth, really, than any other candidate right now. Now, I just came from Washington. You think he's in power in Washington? No. He's simply a figurehead, a caretaker. He's the janitor of the White House. He's the groundskeeper. He counts for nothing. He spends his days receiving delegations of children. How about him? You think he's in power? Not in power. He's the janitor of the Naval Observatory. He has no power. How about Pearl? You know Pearl? He's out. How about these people? Bolton, out. Ledeen, out. Lynn Cheney, out. Frum, out. Bolton has even said that the Bush foreign policy has totally collapsed. And Pearl said that it melted down. This is the new face of what you're dealing with. This is now the threat to you. The neocons and Bush and Cheney are out, out, out. Finish, kaput. Get the idea? This is now the man. Zbigniew Brzezinski. Zbigniew Brzezinski, Polish aristocrat, one consuming passion in life. He destroyed the Warsaw Pact. He destroyed the Soviet Union with the Afghan War. Now he wants to destroy the Russian Federation and carve it into 4 pieces. He is determined to tread the path of Napoleon and Hitler, and he wants you on his side. Now he knows that he can't go on television and make an appeal to you. So he has sent Obama to make an appeal to Europe and to Africa and to others to join him in the attempt to crush Russia and China as the only serious opposition to the US and the British in the world, and to preserve Anglo-American world domination for one more century if he can. He works, of course, for David Rockefeller. These are different networks. Neocon networks, I've talked about them in the past, Leo Strauss, a whole series of other things. We're now in the land of Trilateral Commission, Rockefeller, and of course Bilderberger. Bilderberger and Trilateral quite closely related. When David Rockefeller wanted to create the Trilateral Commission, he turned to Brzezinski. Nelson Rockefeller had Kissinger, David Rockefeller has Brzezinski. Brzezinski is almost 80, he's still going strong, he is stronger than he ever was. And that's the Trilateral logo. That's the new faction that's on top in Washington, along with the Council on Foreign Relations. The first time they had a government, Jimmy Carter, a puppet of the Trilateral Commission and an absolute catastrophe. Now the idea is look at this and realize that Obama will be 10 to 100 times worse. Brzezinski ran Carter in terms of foreign affairs. There's just no other way around it. And what did they do? Volcker, here's Paul Adolf Volcker. This was the Trilateral man who ran the Federal Reserve and deindustrialized the United States and indeed much of the world. He set deindustrialization into motion, which you can see the results here outside, right? People who were concerned about an industrial base. This was the 22% prime rate in industry. Now let's look at some of the things that Carter did, because by looking at Carter we can see what Obama would do. What would he do? Oh, the Shah of Iran. Carter and the Shah. Well, what Carter did to the Shah was to get him out. Carter and Brzezinski deliberately overthrew the Shah. The Shah was politically, of course, a monster, as we know. They didn't care about that. The problem was that he was industrializing Iran very rapidly. He was building about a dozen nuclear reactors. If the Shah had stayed in power for another 10 to 20 years, Iran would already be in the nuclear era. It would be a strong, industrialized country, and nobody would dream of attacking them as they were talking about last year. And of course, it was Brzezinski and Carter who did this operation on the Shah with the help of another Trilateral man, Cyrus Vance. And here you get this. Brzezinski and Carter in a united front with Khomeini, because that's what it was. They insisted on Khomeini. Brzezinski said, I want Khomeini, 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 and only Khomeini. Why? He said, this Islamic fundamentalism is my weapon against the Soviet Union. I will destroy the Soviet Union using Islamic fundamentalism. And that is exactly what he did then with Afghanistan. Brzezinski also had a weakness for Pol Pot. Remember Pol Pot in Cambodia? Maybe that will refresh your memory. There is just no limit to what these people will do. Here's Brzezinski with the Pakistani army looking into Afghanistan when the Soviets had invaded in 1979. Here's Robert Gates, the current Secretary of Defense of the United States. He is working for Brzezinski. In 1977, 78, 79, Gates was an office boy for Brzezinski in the Carter administration. This, by the way, is the founder of Al-Qaeda. And we really ought to say that Brzezinski himself is the founder of what is known as political Islamic fundamentalism. He is the one who created it, not the neocons. He set it into motion with Khomeini. Now, if you notice, Brzezinski has this funny hairdo. He's compared to Woody Woodpecker, the cartoon character. You know him? There's this song, that's the Woody Woodpecker song. That's to greet Brzezinski. Now, I hope you know Andreas von Bülow, very distinguished man, former German deputy defense minister. He has called Brzezinski in public, this dog, dieser Hund, says von Bülow about Brzezinski because he had to deal with him directly. He worked for Helmut Schmidt, and Brzezinski was the main enemy. So relations with Europe were awful. Now the point with Obama is that he is the creation of this network. I've got one book that explains it in general outline, and another book now that will come out soon that will explain this in detail. He has been prepared as a puppet by these networks. Notice also, you have probably been told that Obama is the peace candidate. He is not. In the Democratic Party debate in Chicago, in the middle of last year, about a year ago now, Obama demanded an invasion and bombing of Pakistan. Not Iran, but Pakistan. And we'll see the reason why. So Obama was isolated. Clinton said no. McCain said no. Bush said no. Obama said yes. And this is now what's happening. U.S. policy is what Obama demanded because Brzezinski is already running the show. The other person who is decisively running Obama is, of course, George Soros. So we have Rockefeller interests and Soros interests, and this constitutes the Wall Street group, Goldman Sachs and others behind Obama. Now you do have McCain. The problem with McCain is this. If you want to give imperialism a facelift, is this the way to do it? A little cosmetic surgery for imperialism? Probably not a good idea. McCain is obviously, if he ever got to be president, he would be a transitional figure. He'd be a little bit like Ratzinger. Ratzinger is not going to be around forever. Neither would he. He'd be a one-term president. He'd have a Democratic Congress to deal with. I think he'd be paralyzed. I think there'd be gridlock. And I think that may be the best thing we can actually get right now, is gridlock. Now remember Samuel Huntington, The Clash of Civilizations. Who's Samuel Huntington? He worked for Brzezinski. Back in the Carter administration, Huntington worked on the staff of the National Security Council for Brzezinski. Brzezinski writes his own books, Second Chance. This is a study of how everybody in the world needs to get dignity. Dignity means if you're a Basque, if you're a Kosovar, if you're a Tibetan, if you're in Belgium, if you're in Ostfriesland, anywhere in the world, American, Indian, you have to get a micro-state or mini-state for you. It means the destruction of Russia, China, and just about everybody else. That is what Brzezinski calls dignity. The other one is the choice, similar themes. So he's extremely active. The essence of Brzezinski is Strangelove. He does not go on television anymore because his television persona is so heavily influenced by Dr. Strangelove. And that is indeed what he is. There's Brzezinski. Almost 80. One obsession. Stalin then, Putin now, but Russia. He is an obsessive hater of Russia, and he wants to yoke your family, your energy, and your future to this insane plan. So today it would be Putin. And again, I have rather high regard for Putin. I think he's the most intelligent head of state we've seen in the world lately. Brzezinski argues to the neocons, why are you worried about Iran? Let's think realistically. What's the only real center of military power in the world that could handle the United States? It's the Kremlin. So focus on Russia. Now the other problem, of course, in the Anglo-American world, we have tremendous economic crisis. I can't go into this as much as we should. We have a banking panic. That's Northern Rock. We just had Bear Stearns. We now have IndyMac. We have a constant rolling banking panic. The mentality of banking panic is in the minds of the people. The dollar is dying. That's why I'm so poor. I'm selling my books because my dollars are worth nothing, and what have you. You're also living through dollar hyperinflation. The price of gasoline and food in the United States is now astronomical. I've written about these themes too. Surviving the cataclysm. This is what's happening. See the Federal Reserve? There's a banking, right? The Many people have asked themselves over the past year or so, is there going to be an attack on Iran? As of today, I say, not likely. No. As far as the US and the British are concerned, the Israelis, I can't see how they could do it. Part of it is, of course, if you attack Iran, you give Iran the chance to cut your supply line. Right? Here's the US Army in Iraq. Here's the supply line. It can't be defended. It goes along the Iranian border. It's a hopeless task. The Israelis tried their luck in southern Lebanon 2 years ago. This is how the Israelis ended up. Not so good. So that's not working. Now, as long as I thought there was a danger of an attack on Iran, you could find me out here at the White House. Here I am, Matt Sullivan, others from DC 9/11 Truth. Beware another fake 9/11 to nuke Iran. This was the spring of 2007, more than a year ago. Now let's see the change. Here is the mental world of the neocons. What do they think about it? They have a little world. It's centered on Israel, centered on Jerusalem. They're worried about Iraq, about Syria, about Hamas and Hezbollah and Iran and so forth. They think about Israel's security needs and they proceed from that. Brzezinski has a completely different approach. That's Brzezinski's world. The world. How to organize the world to crush Russia and China if necessary. See, that's included too. Because the idea, of course, is you have the Shanghai Cooperation Organization of Russia and China together. This is Brzezinski's mental world. A constant pressure on every Russian border, wherever and wherever possible. He wants to cause trouble for Russia, and notice he wants to recruit China to be part of it. He'd like to recruit Japan to be part of it. He assumes that you, the European NATO states, will simply go along with this lunatic plan. This is, again, a recipe for World War III. Brzezinski's mental world, leading to the encirclement and breakup of Russia. Now, in the Middle East, of course, they have a plan. It's the Bernard Lewis plan. They all share this, to create Kurdistan, to divide Iraq into three parts, Kurdish, Sunni, Shiite. Notice for Iran, eventually, they'd like to carve Iran, Afghanistan, now it gets interesting. Carve Pakistan, see it? Pashtunistan, Baluchistan. To begin carving Pakistan, but they've gone further. This is now the operative scenario. Divide Pakistan into all of these different countries. Now, why? Why Pakistan? Not Iran, but Pakistan? It's 3 times bigger. They have nuclear weapons, but why pick on them? Is it because of bin Laden hiding in Pakistan? Is it because of Al-Qaeda? No. It's because Pakistan is a Chinese ally. Anybody who's friendly with Russia or China has got to be destroyed in the brave new world of Brzezinski. So with that, we're going to use, and this is now going to happen in the next couple of weeks at most, there's going to be an invasion across this line. See it? The border between Afghanistan and Pakistan. The US and the NATO forces, and if there are Dutch forces, they will be dragged into Pakistan looking for bin Laden, but really a way to destroy Pakistan. The Pakistani Prime Minister was on the television the other night saying, our national dignity, our national sovereignty does not allow foreign troops to come into Pakistan. Well, the US and NATO are bombing, and soon they will be invading, and the government here is going to look pretty sick, and it's going to fall and lose face, and the disintegration of Pakistan is going to begin, because it's a Chinese strategic ally. So they had Musharraf, they want to dump him. They have Karzai. Karzai of Afghanistan is being played against Pakistan by not Cheney anymore, but by the current group. So it means that this entire area dissolves into absolute chaos. Now, Brzezinski's mental world, the zone of percolating violence centered on Afghanistan and including Pakistan, And the idea, of course, is to bring this violence into areas like the Caucasus and Transcaucasus, and then into the republics of Central Asia, and indeed into China. Right? The Chinese, Turkestan, the Uyghurs, the Muslim minority in China, and of course, Brzezinski is behind the Tibet insurrection. This is a typical Brzezinski ploy. We've also got pressure to expand NATO towards Russia more and more, the Baltic republics, these countries here in the Balkans, Romania, Bulgaria, and so forth. There are wars about pipelines. Brzezinski wants the Ukrainians, his friends, to have a veto on gas and oil to Western Europe. So there's a whole complex around that. Ultimately, Brzezinski seems to like the idea of a map like this. This is Europe about 1600. You see Greater Poland? That's Greater Poland. From the Baltic to the Black. Greater Poland. That may be the plan. And here's how we might do it. The Civil War in Russia, 1918 to 1919. See it? The division of Russia into 3, 4, or more separate states. That seems to be the ultimate plan for Brzezinski. Now, in the beginning of it, you've got Ukraine, okay? Now, the Orange Revolution in Ukraine. This is done by the US. This is a people power coup, or CIA color revolution, run by people like Soros and Brzezinski, including Brzezinski's son. So here we have, this is what you see with Obama, it's the same method. Swarming adolescents, callow youth, feckless youth, young people who know virtually nothing, but you give them some flags, you give them some drugs, maybe some money, they come into the square and they oppose the Russian candidate for president. It's a rent-a-mob or a dupe-a-mob. Obama's now going to go across Europe and try to make speeches like this. He wanted to have this at the Brandenburg Gate. He's not going to get it. But this is what he does. He's going to, if he gets the Democratic nomination, he's going to try to do that in a football stadium with 75,000 people to chant for him. And of course the idea is, Khvatit Putina, enough with Putin already. Down with Putin from Oborona. You know this gentleman? Yushchenko, the puppet president of Ukraine. Whose puppet? Brzezinski's puppet. Madeleine Albright tagging along for the ride. Okay? So this is the idea of a NATO agent as the leader of a big, important country. And look how far it goes. When Yushchenko became president, there was an idea that these areas out here might secede from Ukraine. At that point, you might have Russian troops coming in, Polish NATO troops coming in, and you had World War III in sight at the end of 2004. Now this is the kind of thing that's going to happen more and more. There's also a very grave danger of war between Russia and Georgia. This is the other place where the color revolution succeeded. This is the Roses Revolution in Tbilisi, in Georgia. So you get the idea? Brzezinski plays on a much bigger stage than the neocons. And of course he's an expert, the ethnic labyrinth of the Caucasus and Sub-Caucasus, Transcaucasus, Georgia, but the breakaway regions and this entire crazy quilt. These are the kinds of microstates that Brzezinski would like to have all over the world and Europe. Now, the Great Hall of the People in Beijing. This is a target for Brzezinski. Why? Because you've got Russia and China together, and you've got to go after them somehow. China may be the weakest. How do you attack China? Brzezinski says, not by bombing them, but through Africa. How through Africa? Well, take the Sudan. This is a country that has lots of oil. China gets about 7% of its oil from Sudan. Now we have a huge campaign against the government of General Bashir because of Darfur. Why are the Anglo-Americans so interested in this humanitarian emergency? Because they want to overthrow the government in Khartoum and cut off the oil going to China. Zimbabwe, Mugabe. Why are the Anglo-Americans so focused on Zimbabwe? Because this is a mineral-rich country allied with China. You've got Al-Qaeda. I have to tell you, I'm on the Algerian radio a lot. L'Algérie, Radio Algérie, has invited me on to talk about Al-Qaeda, and I tell them, Al-Qaeda has been sent into your country by the US to destabilize your country. And it's the same thing with Morocco, and the same thing with Tunisia. So the idea is basically Africa is going to become a battleground between the US and the British. 15, okay? Between the US and the British for the purpose of, between the US and the Chinese, for the purpose of kicking the Chinese out of Africa. That's what Brzezinski wants. Kick the Chinese out. You got destabilizations in Kenya. Obama's cousin is leading the destabilization of Kenya. Obama's tribe can be used to destabilize a whole area here of Africa, the so-called Luo tribe. Ultimately, what Brzezinski wants is this. If the Chinese can't get oil and minerals from Africa, where can they get them? Brzezinski's going to say, you should go to Siberia. Here's Siberia. Look at all the gas. Look at all the oil. Krasnoyarsk out here, Irkutsk. This is where China should get their minerals and gas and oil. You see what it is? To play China against Russia for the purpose of oil, meaning World War III. Russia and China destroy each other. The Anglo-Americans, Brzezinski thinks, sit back and laugh and dominate the world for another century. Now, this is the kind of stuff that doesn't work. Here's the border between China and Russia. Out here, of course, much oil, very few Russians. This is the vulnerability that Brzezinski would play on. There's also the question of the various pipelines coming out of here and where they will go. And the Anglo-Americans like to make fun of the difficulty of getting a pipeline built across here. So they're always attacking Putin. Another gambit, Kosovo, under what amounts to a criminal organization. We've also got the Polish missile crisis, the Missile Defense Agency. Missiles in Poland, radar in the Czech Republic, and some installations in Lithuania, ex-Soviet territory. The goal of that is a first strike. The US is telling itself it will be possible for the United States to destroy the long-range nuclear arsenals of Russia and China with a first strike. And that is what the capability that they would like to have. And you see it all here. The interceptor missiles going to Poland. The Soviets, the Russians, of course, have a very serious anti-ballistic missile defense. Now, here's the problem. That's a Topol-M Russian intercontinental ballistic missile. It is the best in the world. The US has nothing to come close to this. This is what you're dealing with now. Not some war in Iraq or Iran, but that on your head. That's what Obama means to you. To you, thanks to Brzezinski. He's also got Chechen terrorism. This is Basayev of the Chechens, Maskadov of the Chechens. Remember, these people blew up apartment houses in Moscow, killed upwards of 300 people. You get the idea. Now, this guy is Ilyas Akhmadov. He's the ambassador of the Chechen terror organization to the United States. The Chechen terrorists have an ambassador in Washington, D.C. He's on the State Department payroll. He gets paid by the U.S. taxpayer. He gets his own money, he gets a secretary, an office, a travel budget, and a public relations budget. Why is he there? Because Brzezinski lobbied to bring him there. Brzezinski says the day that this man came to Washington was the happiest day of Brzezinski's life. Now here, can you possibly see a terrorist capability to be used against Russia, run from the United States in the near future? Is that what Brzezinski is thinking? That's what I argue in Obama, the postmodern coup. Now, Having looked at the world situation, what is the new face of terrorism? Will it be bin Laden, Al-Qaeda, Fatah, or will it be something different? And yes, that is Mussolini.